Alright YouTube, so it's been a few days, but we are finally back to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake. So a little while back I did a video talking about how they might change Cid when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Remake. Today I thought we'd go back and look at another character, Vincent. Now with the Cid video, we're more so talking about like censorship when it comes to the character of Cid because he curses a lot, and also some other things that were referenced in an article. That's not really what this is about. I don't think anything censorship-wise is going to happen with Vincent, but more so how he's going to be incorporated into the remake story, because obviously with the original game, Vincent was an optional character. But despite being an optional character within the original Final Fantasy VII, he is heavily involved in the overall Final Fantasy VII compilation. He's in Before Crisis. He's in Crisis Core, though it's a subtle nod with the coffin. He's obviously in the original FF7, and he has his own game with Dirge of Cerberus. And of course was a part of the Advent Children movie, so to say that Vincent is important to the Final Fantasy VII story would be quite the understatement, especially once you dive into his history. The quick TLDR on Vincent's history actually goes back before the birth of Sephiroth, who's interested in Lucretia, who is of course Sephiroth's birth mother. And once Vincent found out she had a connection to the death of his father, Grimoire Valentine, she distanced herself from him. And somehow that led her into the arms of Hojo for some reason, and he got her pregnant. She chose this ugly-ass dude over Vincent. Ridiculous. But on top of all that, she then agreed to and allowed Hojo to experiment on their unborn child. What? Don't get me wrong, Hojo's a terrible person, a very intelligent guy, but he does seem like he's kind of crazy, not all there, right? So we kind of understand it. Why the hell did Lucretia agree to this? I just don't even understand it. Anyways, because of these experiments, we then have Sephiroth, and after his birth, Lucretia fell ill. Vincent blamed himself for this, and that's why he locked himself up within the Chinner Manor, to sort of atone for what he believes to be his sins. And while clearly none of that is actually his fault, Hojo's to blame and so is Lucretia, what a shitty mom. You could sort of look at it in that way if you wanted to, because had he been able to stop Lucretia and Hojo from experimenting on their unborn child, we never would have had Sephiroth, thus we never would have had the FF7 story. And again, that's sort of the TLDR on the Vincent story prior to the events of Final Fantasy VII. There's more to it, obviously, much more. Him getting like shot in the chest by Hojo, the chaos stuff, the proto-materia, all that other shit. Also forgot to mention that he did work with the Turks prior to all of that, but the point of all this is that Vincent has an important role in the overall FF7 story, and he has a connection to a lot of the important characters. Obviously, Sephiroth, as we just discussed. But also the fact that Lucretia was an assistant to Professor Gast gives him that subtle connection to Aerith simply because he knew her father. And possibly her mother. That's something I'd love for them to put into Remake. Like maybe Vincent at some point is talking about his history or his past and mentions Professor Gast or Ifalna, and Aerith, wants to know more about her parents, and maybe he can give her a little bit of like insight. And of course with him being a former Turks member, he has that connection to the Turks and also just Shinra in general. So he has a connection to a lot of characters, man. And with all that backstory, and of course with him having his own goddamn video game at one point, it's why pretty much all of us, like 99.9% of us, believe that he will not be an optional character, along with Yuffie, of course. So the question then becomes, how do you incorporate him into the Final Fantasy VII Remake story organically? In the original game, he was entirely missable. So is Yuffie, but you had the chance of running into Yuffie within the world, like in random locations. It's still kind of hard, like, without a walkthrough, I don't know how you would guess her questions. Like, let's just trial and error, a lot of trial and error, because you gotta do a lot of things in a specific order. And with him, it's the same thing, too. Within the Shinra Manor, like, with all the puzzles and codes and things like that, if you can't figure it out, you can't get Vincent. But with him probably being a mandatory character with Remake, we're not gonna have all that, I wouldn't think. Like, I wouldn't think they're gonna make you do this, like, side quest puzzle thing if you're supposed to get him. Because then if you can't figure it out, you would never get him. You couldn't progress the game ever. So unless they go the route of, like, the door within the basement just not being locked, like, you don't have to find the key, or maybe you find the key within the story, and, like, you're forced to go through the door within the story, and maybe that's how you meet Vincent. They could do that. I'm assuming we're still going to fight Lost Number within the Shinra Manor, but maybe, again, it's a mandatory fight. Maybe opening the safe is mandatory. Maybe that's where we do find the key for the story or something like that. It'll suck to not have the little side quest of doing like the codes, like walking a certain amount of steps, and obviously the hidden number. That was the one that got me as a kid. Despite it being pretty obvious looking at it now that there's that empty space down there, that there's a hidden thing you could pick. I was a kid then. I didn't think to even go scroll down all the way past 3. So I wasn't able to figure that out till a little bit later in my life. But hopefully if, like, a lot of that stuff within the Shinra Manor is mandatory for Remake, they could recreate the, like, side quest of all that, and maybe it leads to, like, something, like a treasure, like maybe a weapon or some material or something. It'd be kind of cool for them to recreate the Shinra Manor, like, side quest within Remake, and maybe the Vincent stuff is just mandatory. And with him more than likely being a mandatory character, like, I'm assuming he's still going to be within the Shinra Manor in the basement, because him being within the coffin is important to the story. He's there for a reason. Again, he's been there for like 20 years to atone for his sins. So we got to find him in the Shinra Manor within the coffin. So I don't know if they're going to do anything different with him at all. Like, he might just be the same thing. And with him being a mandatory character, they're going to have to give him a lot more story, right? Because he didn't have a whole lot of story in the original game. He had some lines, depending on if he's in your party or not, of course. And you had the Lucretia Cave stuff. But for the most part, you could do a playthrough and you wouldn't miss him. And once he joins our party in Remake, at some point we're going to have to get some story on Vincent Valentine. Whether it's him telling us or somebody else telling us, we're going to have to learn his history. Same thing as we do with all the other characters. Now, we've speculated in the past, and so have other people, that Part 2 might end at Nibelheim, which would then put us coming across Vincent at the end of the game. So we might get another Red 13 situation, which would honestly kind of suck. To get another character that's coming to our party, but we can't really control them or use them until the next game. Like, that's going to be kind of stupid if that happens again. I see some people speculate that maybe Vincent could be the final boss of Part 2 in Nibelheim, and that could work if it's one of his monster forms, specifically Chaos, of course, who's like his strongest form. Like, maybe we wake him up and it startles him awake or scares him awake or something like that, or maybe he's just reacting to being woken up after like 20-something years, and he just turns into Chaos and we gotta fight him, and that could work for a final boss, potentially. And I think he could work as a boss fight, but I don't know that we could end Part 2 on that fight, right? Because we know it's not a bad guy. It's Vincent. He's going to join our party. He's a good guy. So I don't know that you could end Part 2 with him being the last thing that you fight, but maybe we fight him prior to the actual final boss. Like, maybe we fight him in the chapter before the final chapter or something like that. Actually, maybe that's how he joins our party in Remake. Maybe we do fight him, and after we fight him, like, he kind of, clears up his head, and he decides to join us to hunt down Sephiroth and things like that. I think that actually makes a lot more sense than what the original game did. Similar to how they handled Red 13 despite not being able to control him in, Remake. He doesn't join our party instantly. He helps us, but he doesn't join our party. This could be the same thing. Instead of us just waking up Vincent and he joins our party right away, like, we actually fight him first, which would be kind of cool. And actually, as we mentioned earlier, it wouldn't be the first time we fought a character in FF7 before they joined our party. So, of course, I want to pass it to you guys in the comment section. What are your thoughts on this? How do you think they're going to handle Vincent when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Remake? He's obviously going to be a mandatory character, and with that's going to come a lot more content that didn't exist in FF7. Even if it's just them expanding on things we learned in Before Crisis, Crisis Core, Dirge of Cerberus, whatever, they're going to have to give him more stuff, more screen time. So, how do you think they're going to handle Vincent Valentine? Either way, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to see if you guys are new. We'll stay updated with more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @dashingdavid. I'm on Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description. Into the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.